So the motherboard of my choice is the ASUS TUF Gaming Z790-Plus Wi-Fi motherboard. This motherboard provides full support for the 13th Gen Intel CPU right out of the box. No BIOS flash required. And like I mentioned before, this motherboard uses Intel's Z790 chipset that allows you to overclock both the CPU and the memory. But keep in mind that in order to overclock your CPU, you will need a K suffix Intel CPU. So something like an Intel Core i7-13700K or the Intel Core i9-13900K. The K stands for unlocked multiplier, and if your CPU does not have an unlocked multiplier, you cannot overclock your CPU with this motherboard. Now before I nerd out on specs, let's first talk about the aesthetics of this motherboard. And I think it looks really gorgeous. This motherboard incorporates an embossed nameplate and a geometric design when it comes to metallic heatsinks, which I think looks really cool. The motherboard houses a couple of RGB lights that can be synced with the rest of your system. By default, these RGB lights are turned on even when the PC is sleeping. Honestly, I find this default behavior quite annoying. Since my PC resides in my bedroom, the last thing I want is to see a rainbow RGB pattern when I'm trying to sleep. Luckily, you can turn it off from the software setting. Now regarding thermals, ASUS has done an excellent job with high quality heatsinks for the VRMs, for the chipsets and for the M.2 SSD drives. Now in addition to the CPU and AIO liquid cooler pump headers, there are 4 chassis fan headers and they can all be individually controlled via the BIOS or the ASUS desktop utility. So regardless of what PC case you plan to use, thermals are not going to be an issue. Regarding memory, this motherboard comes with 4 DIMM slots. Each slot can take up to 32 GB of DDR5 RAM. So in theory, you can install a maximum of 4 times 32, so that's 128 GB of DDR5 RAM in your system. You can overclock supported memory modules up to 7200 mega transfers per second. Now the ASUS BIOS provides very easy memory overclocking. Although there is an advanced BIOS mode, beginners can apply pre-validated XMP memory profiles from the standard BIOS mode, and I really appreciate this because not everybody wants to go in the advanced mode and mess around with the setting. Now if you're an expert who knows what you are doing, then the advanced BIOS mode will allow you to tweak every memory parameter to give you the best possible performance. Now personally, I did not mess with custom memory overclocking. I'm just not into, tweaking the fine parameters of memory. I just picked the fastest supported XMP profile for my memory module and I called it a day. Since I'm using my PC mostly for video editing, stability is more important for me and I would rather have a stable system than extract few extra percentage of performance at the cost of instability. Next, let's talk about the expansion slots. So you get one PCIe 5.0 x 16 slot which will support the latest GPU from Nvidia and AMD. This slot has a handy switch to eject the GPU conveniently without twisting your fingers. You also get one PCIe 4.0 x 16 slot that will support the X4 mode. In addition, there is one PCIe 4.0 X4 slot and two PCIe 3.0 X1 slot. So there is plenty of room for expansion regardless of what your use case is. Next, let's talk about storage option. So I think storage option is where this motherboard truly shines. You get a total of 4 M.2 slots for connecting up to 4 fast PCIe Nvme SSDs. They all use the fast PCIe 4.0 X4 lanes for peak performance. ASUS also provides heatsinks for all M.2 drives except one port which does not come with a heatsink. So be prepared to buy an additional heatsink for your M.2 drive if you plan to max out all these 4 SSD slots. In addition to M.2 slots, there are 4 SATA 6 gigabits per second ports for hooking up 4 additional SATA drives. So when it comes to storage, you will have more than enough space to save all your multimedia files. Next, let's talk about the back panel I/O. So you get one USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2 Type-C port, and this port will support 20 gigabits per second of data transfer. You also get one 10 gigabit per second USB Type-C port and two 10 gigabit per second USB Type-A ports. In addition, you get four 5 gigabits per second USB Type-A ports. Unfortunately, there is no USB 4 Thunderbolt port in the back panel I/O of this motherboard. But interestingly enough, this motherboard does have a USB 4 Thunderbolt controller. So if your case has a USB 4 Thunderbolt port in the front, you will be able to connect it to the motherboard and you will be able to use the Thunderbolt, which is the 40 gigabit per second speed. Now regarding internet connectivity, Wi-Fi 6E is built into this motherboard, and ASUS provides a nice magnetic antenna that you can stick anywhere on your PC case. Also, the latest Bluetooth protocol is supported and it's baked right into the motherboard, so you don't need to buy any dongle. So overall, I think this ASUS TUF Gaming Z790-Plus motherboard, I think it's a fantastic option for folks who are planning to build a 13th gen Intel based PC.